Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of the Ozark Mountains. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. The year was 1885, a different time in America. The Civil War had ended 2 decades prior, but its scars still marked the land and its people. The frontier was closing, yet vast stretches of wilderness remained untamed, unmapped, and largely unknown. It was during this time that 5 experienced hikers embarked on what was supposed to be a routine expedition into the dense forests of the Ozark Mountains in northwestern Arkansas. These weren't ordinary travelers seeking a weekend's diversion. These were seasoned outdoorsmen respected for their knowledge of the terrain and survival skills. Their names: Thomas Blackwood, age 42, a former Union soldier and cartographer; James Hollister, 39, a geologist with ties to the University of Arkansas; William Preston, 44, a local guide who had traversed these mountains since boyhood; Edward Montgomery, 35, a botanist documenting the region's flora; and Samuel Green, 40, a photographer commissioned to capture the rugged beauty of the Ozarks for a St. Louis newspaper. Their journey began on September 15, 1885, from the small settlement of Eureka Springs, a burgeoning spa town nestled in the mountains. They were expected to return within 14 days. They never did. The search party dispatched on October 3rd discovered their abandoned camp near what is now known as White Rock Mountain, approximately 20 miles east of Fayetteville. Their tents remained standing, their equipment lay untouched. Their journals ended abruptly on September 22nd, and all 5 men had vanished without a trace. What happened in those remote mountains during those 7 days in September 1885? The official investigation concluded with disturbing brevity: lost to the elements. But a collection of documents discovered during a courthouse renovation in Fayetteville in 1963 suggests something far more unsettling occurred in those woods, something that local authorities may have deliberately concealed from public record. Tonight, we unravel this forgotten mystery, piecing together fragmented accounts, suppressed testimonies, and the haunting final entries from the expedition's recovered journals. The Blackwood expedition, as it came to be known, represents more than a simple case of hikers losing their way. It offers a glimpse into something darker, a narrative of isolation, mounting dread, and the psychological unraveling of 5 rational men confronted with something beyond their understanding, something that has remained buried in the shadows of history for nearly a century. Thomas Blackwood had selected the expedition members with careful deliberation. Each man brought specific expertise that complemented the others. Having mapped portions of the Western Territories after the war, Blackwood had developed a reputation for thoroughness and precision. His maps were considered among the most reliable of the era. The Arkansas Gazette had once described him as possessing an almost supernatural sense of direction and spatial awareness. He was known to detect errors in existing maps by simply studying them, often without having visited the terrain they depicted. His service during the Civil War had hardened him against the typical discomforts of outdoor living, and associates noted his exceptional calm under pressure. A widower since 1879, Blackwood had devoted himself entirely to his cartographic work, living modestly in a small apartment in St. Louis filled with maps, measuring instruments, and correspondence from geographical societies across the country. James Hollister had published several respected papers on the unique geological formations of the Ozarks, theorizing about their origins and composition. His academic colleagues described him as methodical to the point of obsession, recording measurements with precision to the 3rd decimal place. Unlike many scholars of his era, Hollister preferred field work to theory, believing that rocks must be known through touch and sound as much as through chemical analysis. He had developed several innovative techniques for dating limestone formations and had recently been corresponding with European geologists about unusual mineral deposits he'd discovered in the Ozarks that defied conventional classification. A bachelor devoted to his studies, Hollister's personal journals reveal a man more comfortable with stone than with human company, yet he maintained cordial professional relationships with fellow scientists. William Preston, though lacking formal education, possessed an intimate knowledge of the mountain paths that no academic study could provide. Born in the Ozarks, he had spent his entire life exploring the region's most remote areas. Local accounts describe him as capable of navigating through dense forest on the darkest nights without light, guided by subtle changes in air temperature and the sound of distant water. His understanding of the region's weather patterns was so acute that farmers often consulted him before planting. Preston rarely spoke about himself, but those who knew him mentioned his uncanny ability to sense approaching storms days before any visible signs appeared. He lived alone in a cabin he had built himself approximately 7 miles outside Eureka Springs, supporting himself as a guide and by selling furs and medicinal herbs gathered from the mountains. Edward Montgomery's botanical catalogs were sought after by universities throughout the country. His specialization in plants with medicinal properties had earned him recognition from pharmaceutical companies and medical schools alike. Described by colleagues as methodical and introspective, Montgomery kept exhaustive notes on his observations, often including detailed sketches alongside scientific descriptions. His previous expeditions had resulted in the identification of 3 previously undocumented plant species, one of which, Aconitum montgomery, bears his name. Originally from Boston, Montgomery had developed his passion for botany after recovering from a severe illness in his youth, crediting the herbal remedies prepared by his grandmother with saving his life. He had come to Arkansas specifically to study the unique plant life of the Ozarks, having heard rumors of unusual botanical specimens with properties not documented elsewhere. Samuel Green's photography had appeared in publications as far east as Boston. A pioneer in wilderness photography, Green had developed modified equipment that allowed him to transport the cumbersome glass plates and chemicals necessary for his craft into remote locations. His images were noted for their unusual clarity and composition, capturing not just the grandeur of landscapes, but also subtle details that conveyed the essence of a place. Green had begun his career documenting the aftermath of Civil War battles, an experience that had left him with a somber perspective but a keen eye for significant details others might miss. His commissioned work for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch represented a considerable investment by the newspaper, reflecting the growing public interest in America's wilderness areas. Green was married with 2 young adult sons, both of whom had followed their father into photographic careers, though focusing on portraiture rather than wilderness documentation. These were not men prone to panic or superstition. Their credentials and experience made them unlikely candidates for becoming lost or succumbing to wilderness hazards. The official report's dismissal of their disappearance as simply lost to the elements strikes a particularly hollow note when examining the men's backgrounds. The expedition's stated purpose was to document a specific region of the Ozarks that remained poorly mapped, a valley system approximately 15 miles northeast of what would later become the community of Pettigrew. Blackwood's correspondence with the Geographic Society of St. Louis, dated August 1885, expressed his intention to produce the most comprehensive rendering of this overlooked territory to date. He specifically mentioned unusual topographical features reported by local hunters, but absent from existing maps. The discrepancies between eyewitness accounts and current cartographic representations suggest either significant errors in our understanding of the region or terrain features that defy conventional mapping techniques, he wrote. In a letter to a fellow geologist at Yale University, dated July 28, 1885, he described hearing accounts of stone arrangements that appear to contradict known principles of erosion and deposition. Specifically, columnar structures emerging from limestone beds at angles that suggest deliberate placement rather than natural processes. He speculated these might represent either an undocumented geological phenomenon or possibly artifacts from ancient indigenous habitation, though he noted no known records of permanent settlements in that specific area. Either possibility warrants thorough investigation. Hollister had mentioned to colleagues his interest in several unusual rock formations reported by hunters in the area. Montgomery sought specimens of rare medicinal plants rumored to grow in the valley's microclimate. His correspondence with the Botanical Garden at Harvard mentioned reports of flora exhibiting characteristics inconsistent with their taxonomic classification, specimens that appear to be hybrids of species that should not naturally cross-pollinate. He had obtained dried samples from local herbalists that displayed structural anomalies worthy of scientific documentation, though he expressed skepticism about some of the medicinal properties attributed to them by local folklore. Green was to photograph not only the landscape but also any unusual geological features for Hollister's research. His contract with the Post-Dispatch specifically mentioned capturing images of the rumored stone columns that have become something of a local legend among hunters and trappers. A notation in his personal expense ledger indicates he had invested in specialized equipment for this expedition, including a new wide-angle lens for capturing broad landscape views and additional glass plates beyond his usual allocation. What makes this expedition particularly noteworthy is the meticulous planning that preceded it. Provisions were calculated with mathematical precision, sufficient for 21 days despite the planned 14-day duration, providing a substantial safety margin. Routes were outlined with alternative paths should weather conditions deteriorate. Blackwood's preliminary mapping notes show 3 distinct approaches to the valley system, with contingency routes marked in case of obstacles. They carried medical supplies sufficient for treating common wilderness injuries, including compounds prepared by Montgomery specifically for the expedition. Even their departure date was selected based on historical weather patterns to minimize the risk of early autumn storms. Nothing was left to chance. And yet, something went catastrophically wrong. The settlement of Eureka Springs recorded the expedition's departure on a clear Tuesday morning. Several witnesses noted the men's confident demeanor as they headed eastward into the mountains. A shopkeeper who sold them final supplies described them as in good spirits, joking among themselves about which of them would make the most significant discovery. The proprietor of the Mountain View Hotel, where the men had spent their final night before departure, recalled Blackwood studying maps late into the evening, making final notations with a brass compass and specialized ruler he carried. This would be the last confirmed sighting of any of the 5 men alive. The initial days of their journey can be reconstructed through journal entries recovered from the abandoned camp. Blackwood's leather-bound notebook, remarkably preserved despite exposure to the elements, provides a methodical account of their progress through September 20th. His handwriting, precise and measured in early entries, would show subtle yet disturbing changes in character as the days progressed. September 15th, his first entry after departure, reads, "Clear conditions. Barometer steady at 30.2 inches. Temperature 64 degrees at 7 a.m., rising to 72 degrees by midday. Left Eureka Springs at 6:30 a.m., proceeding east-northeast along established trail for approximately 8 miles before turning due east on game path as planned. Terrain moderately challenging, primarily oak and hickory forest, with occasional limestone outcroppings. Preston identified fresh deer tracks, suggesting good hunting prospects. Made camp at coordinates marked on accompanying map near small stream. Elevation approximately 1,450 feet. All members in good health and spirits. Hollister noted unusual stratification in exposed rock face approximately 1/4 mile south of camp. Plans to investigate tomorrow. Distance covered approximately 11 miles. Entries for September 16th and 17th continue in this vein. Precise, methodical documentation of their road, weather conditions, and observations. Nothing in these early accounts suggests any cause for concern. Preston successfully hunted a deer on the evening of the 16th, providing fresh meat to supplement their provisions. Montgomery collected several plant specimens he considered worthy of documentation. Green photographed a particularly dramatic limestone bluff that Hollister believed showed evidence of unusual erosion patterns. Their progress remained slightly ahead of schedule, despite occasionally challenging terrain. On September 18th, the group reached the valley they sought to document. Blackwood's entry describes it as remarkably secluded, enclosed by steep ridges on three sides, with a narrow passage to the northeast that appears to extend further than our maps indicate. He noted with satisfaction that they had arrived ahead of schedule, allowing additional time for their respective studies. The entry continues. The valley floor lies approximately 300 feet below the surrounding ridgelines, creating a distinct microclimate. Montgomery has already identified several plant species that appear to differ subtly from their counterparts elsewhere in the range. Air temperature in the valley noticeably warmer than surrounding terrain, approximately 8 degrees differential. Sound carries unusually well, can clearly hear Hollister's hammer against rock samples nearly half a mile distant. Preston reports game trails appear oddly uniform in width and direction. All seem to avoid the center of the valley. Curious feature that warrants further observation. That evening, they established what would become their final camp atop a flat ridge overlooking the valley, with a small stream nearby providing fresh water. Blackwood's entry notes, selected elevated position for camp, rather than valley floor as originally planned, based on Preston's recommendation. He expressed vague concerns about the valley itself, without specific justification, out of character for him, but his instincts have proven reliable in the past, perhaps related to the unusual game trail patterns. From our elevation, we have excellent sight lines across the entire valley system. Moonrise at 8:17 p.m. revealed unusual rock formations in the valley's northern section that appear to form geometric patterns when viewed from above. Hollister, quite excited by this prospect, plans detailed examination tomorrow. The journals from September 19th and 20th detail routine activities, Montgomery collecting plant specimens, Hollister examining rock formations, Preston hunting for fresh game, Green photographing the landscape, and Blackwood taking measurements for his cartographic work. The weather remained clear, their supplies ample, their health excellent. Nothing in these entries provides any indication of the inexplicable events that would follow. Hollister's entry from the 19th contains the first subtle suggestion of anomaly. Spent morning examining stone formations in northern section of valley. Configuration defies conventional explanation. Columns of limestone arranged in what appears to be deliberate patterns, yet showing no evidence of human tooling or placement. Spacing between columns mathematically consistent, precisely 2.37 meters between each, forming perfect equilateral triangles when viewed from above. No known geological process produces such uniformity. Rock composition typical of regional limestone, yet internal crystalline structure shows unusual alignment patterns visible when samples are held to light. Magnetic compass behaves erratically within triangular formations. Needle fluctuates by 15-20 degrees when moved from one point to another over distances of less than 1 meter. No obvious mineral deposits that would explain magnetic anomalies. Montgomery's notes from the same day mention plant specimens collected from within stone formation area exhibit subtle but measurable differences from identical species found elsewhere in the valley. Leaf structures more symmetrical, vascular systems more uniform in diameter, root structures more geometrically regular, almost as though the plant growth has been subtly influenced by some unknown factor. Collected duplicate samples for comparative analysis. Most striking, all plants within the stone formation area orient their growth patterns toward the center of the triangular arrangement, regardless of sun position or water source. Behavior inconsistent with established botanical principles. Green's journal entry, brief by comparison. Exposed 14 plates today of various valley features. Particular focus on stone formations at Hollister's request. Unusual difficulties with equipment when photographing within the triangular arrangement. Light meter readings inconsistent. Focus difficult to maintain despite clear conditions. 3 plates completely fogged despite proper handling procedures. Maybe chemical contamination, though no obvious source. Will develop test plate tomorrow to determine cause. Preston's entry stands out for its uncharacteristic brevity and tone. Game trails terminate abruptly 50 yards from stone arrangement. No tracks of any kind within or near the formation, despite soft ground that should show passage. No bird's nest in trees near the stones. No insects visible on or near the stones. Wrong feeling about the whole area. Recommended to Blackwood we avoid further investigation. He insists we continue as planned. Then came September 21st, the day everything changed. Montgomery's journal entry from that morning begins conventionally enough. Rose before dawn to collect specimens while the dew remains. The valley's plant life appears subtly different from what we've observed elsewhere in the range. Variations in coloration and structure that warrant further study. But his entry concludes with an observation that, in retrospect, carries ominous significance. The silence here is unlike anywhere I've experienced. No birdsong this morning, no insects. Preston confirms he's noticed the same. Curious. Blackwood's entry from the same day mentions the silence as well, but attributes it to perhaps a passing weather pattern affecting wildlife behavior. He notes that Preston seemed unusually agitated upon returning from his morning scouting, but offers no elaboration. Barometer reading normal at 30.1 inches. No indication of approaching storm or other meteorological disturbance that might explain wildlife behavior. Temperature slightly cooler than yesterday, 64 degrees at dawn, rising to only 68 degrees by midday, despite clear skies and direct sunlight. Preston refuses to return to the stone formation area, claiming the air feels wrong there. Uncharacteristically superstitious language from him. Hollister's notes focus on a series of unusual rock formations he discovered approximately 1 mile south of their camp, symmetrical arrangements that suggest deliberate placement rather than natural erosion patterns. The triangular configuration repeats across a wider area than initially documented, forming what appears to be a complex geometric pattern visible only when mapped from above. Individual stone columns remain precisely 2.37 meters apart, regardless of terrain variations, a mathematical consistency that defies natural explanation. Core samples extracted from 3 columns show identical internal crystalline structures oriented along the same axis despite their physical separation, a phenomenon I cannot explain through any known geological principle. His entry continues with a disturbing observation. Attempted to create precise map of stone arrangements using compass triangulation, but magnetic anomalies render conventional measurements unreliable. More disturbing, when comparing this morning's sketches with those made yesterday, configuration appears subtly altered, distances unchanged, but orientation shifted approximately 3 degrees clockwise. Either my initial measurements contained error, unlikely given multiple verification, or the stones themselves have somehow moved. Latter explanation impossible according to known physics, yet evidence suggests otherwise. Green's journal contains no written entry for this date, only a list of photographic exposures taken, numbered 1 through 17, with cryptic notations beside several. Exposure 4. Anomalous shadow pattern, source undefined. Exposure 9. Secondary image apparent on plate despite single exposure. Exposure 12. Central distortion increasing. Equipment verified functioning normally. Exposure 17. Subject appears in frame, despite absence during exposure. Plate secured separately. Significantly, none of the photographs cataloged in Green's journal were found among the recovered items. His camera remained in his tent, but the photographic plates were missing. This discrepancy was noted in the initial investigation but dismissed as irrelevant. Perhaps the plates were damaged and discarded, or Green had packed them separately and they were lost. A single loose page, apparently torn from Green's journal, and found pressed between pages of Blackwood's notebook, contains a hastily written note. The images show something moving between the stones, not visible to naked eye. Each plate shows it closer to camp. Cannot show the others yet. Need to verify not equipment error. Last plate shows it at edge of camp while we slept. Distinctive shape unlike any animal or human figure. Proportions wrong. Movement pattern wrong. We'll recheck calibration and develop confirmation plate tonight. The final dated journal entry from any member of the expedition comes from Thomas Blackwood on September 22nd. His normally meticulous handwriting appears hurried, the ink blotched in places as though written in haste or with an unsteady hand. Preston returned from his scouting at dawn in a state of considerable distress. Claims to have found something in the valley's northern section that we must document immediately. Refuses to elaborate. His behavior is erratic, not characteristic of him at all. Hollister and I will accompany him after breakfast to investigate. Montgomery and Green remain at camp to organize specimens. This entry ends abruptly. The remaining pages of Blackwood's journal are blank except for a single phrase on the final page, written in handwriting markedly different from his previous entries. Larger, more angular, with unusual spacing between letters, "The stones are not stones." When the search party discovered their camp 11 days later, they found an undisturbed scene that defied explanation. The 5 tents stood intact, bedrolls laid out, as if awaiting their occupants' return. A cooking pot hung above the cold remains of a fire. Personal items, pocket watches, tobacco pipes, spectacles, lay precisely where one would expect their owners to have left them temporarily. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of animal predation, no indication of theft or violence. It was as though the 5 men had simply stepped away from their camp for a moment and vanished into the mountain air. The most perplexing aspect, noted by the search party's leader, Sheriff Ambrose Layton, in his official report, no footprints led away from the camp in any direction despite the soft ground that should have preserved such evidence. It was as if something had erased not only the men, but any trace of their departure. The only unusual feature, one deemed insignificant in the official report but highlighted in suppressed testimonies, was a perfect circle of small stones surrounding the camp, each stone placed exactly the same distance from the next, forming a boundary approximately 30 feet in diameter around the site. The official investigation concluded within 3 weeks. This explanation, while plausible to outside observers unfamiliar with the specific circumstances, fails to address numerous inconsistencies, the undisturbed nature of the camp, the lack of any trail leading away from the site, the fact that no significant rainfall had been recorded in the area during the period in question, the experienced nature of the expedition members who would have recognized and avoided flash flood dangers, and perhaps most significantly, the complete absence of any physical remains despite an extensive search of downstream areas where bodies or equipment would likely have been deposited by floodwaters. The county coroner filed a report attributing the disappearance to misadventure in hazardous terrain, suggesting the men had likely fallen victim to a flash flood in one of the narrow canyons common to the region. No bodies were ever recovered to confirm this theory. The families received letters of condolence, but little substantive information. The case was closed, the file sealed, and the Blackwood expedition faded from public memory, mentioned occasionally in regional newspapers as a cautionary tale about the dangers of wilderness exploration, but the specific details gradually obscured by time and deliberate obfuscation. For 78 years that remained the extent of what was known about the fate of these 5 men. Then, in 1963, during renovations to the Washington County Courthouse in Fayetteville, workers discovered a sealed metal box hidden within a wall cavity behind a damaged section of wainscoting in the basement archives. The box contained documents related to the original investigation, documents that had never been included in the official record. Among them, the complete journals of all 5 expedition members, not just the fragments initially disclosed. A sealed envelope containing a detailed map of their route with notations in Blackwood's hand. Statements from 3 members of the search party that directly contradicted the official report. And most disturbing of all, a personal letter from County Sheriff Ambrose Layton to Arkansas Governor Simon Hughes, dated October 28, 1885, recommending that all information regarding the true circumstances of the Blackwood expedition be permanently withheld from public knowledge in the interest of regional stability and to prevent undue panic among the populace. What truth was so disturbing that a county sheriff felt compelled to conceal it with the governor's complicity? The answer lies in the complete journals and suppressed testimonies, records that paint a far more disturbing picture than mere misadventure. The complete journals reveal that the expedition had begun experiencing unusual phenomena from their very first night in the valley. Preston's full entries, omitted from the official record, describe sounds unlike any wildlife I've encountered in 30 years of mountain travel. Not animal, not bird, not insect, but something that seemed to mimic all 3 in unsettling combination. He noted that these sounds seemed to emanate from different directions simultaneously, creating what he called a disorienting effect that made it impossible to determine their source. His entry from the night of September 18th, their first in the valley, reads, "Made camp before sunset as planned. Location secure with good visibility and water access. Something wrong with this valley. Sound behaves differently here. Voices seem to linger in the air after speaking. Echo patterns inconsistent with terrain features. After dusk, heard unusual noises from valley floor, rhythmic patterns suggesting language rather than animal calls, but unlike any speech I've encountered. Repeating sequences of 3 distinct sounds, then 5, then 8, mathematical progression. No visible source despite clear moonlight. Others heard it too. Blackwood suggests geological explanation, air moving through rock formations, creating unusual acoustics. Explanation insufficient, but accepted by others. September 19th, Preston writes, "Woke before dawn. Usual morning sounds absent, no birds, no insects. Scouted immediate area, no tracks or signs of large predators that might explain silence. Found unusual arrangement of twigs and leaves approximately 50 yards from camp. Items not naturally fallen, but placed in precise circular pattern, 8 feet in diameter. No wind during night to create such formation. Pattern similar to stone arrangements in valley, but smaller scale. Did not mention to others yet. Will continue observation. Accompanied Hollister to stone formation area but remained at perimeter while he conducted examinations. Air temperature near stones noticeably cooler than surrounding area, approximately 10 degrees differential without apparent cause. Montgomery's unabridged botanical notes mention plant specimens that appeared to change orientation overnight, as though the entire root structure had shifted position while maintaining the appearance of being undisturbed. His entry from September 20th elaborates. Placed marker flags at precise locations of 5 distinct specimens within study area. Before sunset, confirming positions with triangulation measurements. Stones seemed to absorb sound, his hammering barely audible despite proximity. At dawn, all specimens had shifted position by exactly 3.6 inches to the northeast, while appearing completely undisturbed, soil around bases showing no signs of movement or disturbance. Root systems, when carefully excavated, show no evidence of having been moved, as though plants had somehow grown into new positions overnight, despite being mature specimens. Phenomenon defies botanical principles. Repeated measurements to confirm no error in original positioning. Used Blackwood surveying equipment to verify precision. No natural explanation for observed movement. His notes continue. More troubling. Dissection of leaf samples from specimens within stone formation area reveals cellular structures unlike standard morphology for these species. Vascular systems show geometric rather than organic patterns, perfect hexagonal arrangements rather than natural branching structures. Cell walls thicker than normal and containing unusual pigmentation that responds to light by changing color, shifts from deep green to indigo when removed from direct sunlight, regardless of chlorophyll content. No known botanical process explains these characteristics. Green's journal, completely absent from the original investigation records, contains increasingly troubled entries about his photographic work. On September 20th, he wrote, "Second time this has occurred, landscapes photographed in clear conditions show inexplicable distortions when developed, areas of complete darkness where sunlight clearly fell, suggestions of movement where none was visible to the naked eye, equipment checked thoroughly." No explanation for these anomalies. His detailed notes on photographic procedures, typically methodical and technical, show increasing agitation. Exposure calculations verified multiple times, chemical solutions mixed to precise specifications, glass plates from same manufacturing batch used for control images outside valley show no similar effects. Distortions appear exclusively in plates exposed within valley perimeter, intensity increasing in images taken near stone formations. Most concerning, chronological progression of plates shows consistent pattern. Each distortion appears to move closer to camera position over sequential exposures, as though tracking our presence. A separate entry later the same day developed plates for morning session while others conducted field studies. Results increasingly difficult to dismiss as equipment error or chemical contamination. Plate 7, exposed facing northeast across valley from elevated position, shows distinct anomaly. Elongated shape approximately human height, but impossibly thin, standing between stone columns. Location was empty when photograph taken, verified visually before and after exposure. Figure appears to be looking directly at camera despite being over 300 yards from position. Features indistinct but suggestion of symmetrical structure unlike any known animal. Have secured plates separately. Will show to Blackwood tonight after others sleep. Hollister's geological observations, starting September 19th, document rock formations that seem to contradict fundamental principles. Stratification patterns impossible, according to established geological understanding, layers appearing to intersect at angles that defy physical properties of sedimentary deposition. Mathematical impossibility. Must be optical illusion or previously undocumented process. His measurements, recorded with scientific precision, reveal increasingly impossible findings. Stone columns maintain constant temperature of 42.7 degrees regardless of ambient conditions or direct sunlight, verified with 3 different thermometers to eliminate instrument error. Core samples resist normal abrasion testing. Hardness exceeds 9 on Mohs scale, yet material identified as standard limestone through chemical analysis. When placed in proximity to each other, core samples taken from different columns appear to generate subtle magnetic field detectable with compass, but not measurable with conventional equipment. Samples separated by more than 30 feet lose this property. Most disturbing, his entry from September 21st. Mapping project reveals larger pattern, not visible from ground level. Stone arrangements form precise mathematical sequence across valley floor. Relationship only apparent when plotted to scale on grid system. Pattern resembles complex geometric formula rather than random natural distribution or human construction. Central point of pattern corresponds with area Preston refuses to approach. Formation appears to expand outward in Fibonacci sequence, with new elements appearing at precise intervals. Cross-reference today's measurements with yesterday's coordinates. Pattern has expanded overnight. New stone columns present that were not there before. Cannot verify movement directly, but mathematical progression suggests coordinated expansion of entire system. Pattern, if projected forward mathematically, We'll reach our camp in approximately 34 hours. But it is Blackwood's complete journal that provides the most disturbing progression. His entries remain rational and measured through September 20th. By the 21st, subtle changes appear, not just in content, but in the physical characteristics of his writing. The spacing between words becomes irregular. Certain letters are formed differently than in previous entries. And marginalia appear, small symbols that resemble no known cartographic notation, growing more frequent and elaborate with each entry. His September 21st midday entry shows the first significant deviation from his methodical style. Magnetic compass completely unreliable within valley perimeter. North position shifts unpredictably, rendering conventional mapping impossible. Attempted astronomical positioning using noon sun and chronometer calculations yield impossible coordinates, placing our position over 20 miles from known location. Sextant readings of landmarks similarly distorted. Angles summed to values exceeding geometrical possibility within Euclidean space. The entry continues with increasingly troubled observations. Distances between fixed points appear to vary depending on direction of measurement. Distance from camp to prominent boulder measures 342 feet when walking north to south, but 376 feet when measured south to north using identical methodology and equipment. Observed water in stream flowing briefly uphill for approximately 3 seconds before resuming normal course, phenomenon witnessed independently by Montgomery, who suggested optical illusion due to terrain. Illusion insufficient explanation for observed effect. His final complete entry, dated 10:30 p.m. on September 21st, after the abrupt entry of the 22nd mentioned in official records, reads, "Cannot sleep. The silence is absolute now, not even the sound of wind in the trees." Preston refuses to speak about what he saw this morning, sits staring northeast toward the valley. Hollister, examining rock samples by lamplight, claims patterns are shifting before his eyes. Montgomery reports specimens wilting and rejuvenating in cycles of precisely 17 minutes. Green destroyed his photographic plates at sunset, claimed they showed something moving in the background of each exposure, something drawing closer with each image. Am I responsible for bringing them here? The patterns in the stars tonight are wrong. Constellations I've navigated by for decades appear altered, as though the sky itself has shifted. Or perhaps it is we who have shifted. Preston, now muttering about the space between places, says we've crossed into it unknowingly. God help us. What if he's right? This final entry ends with a drawn symbol, unlike the others, more complex, resembling an interconnected series of triangles and curves that fills nearly half the page. Below it, a single line in handwriting, noticeably different from Blackwood's usual script. They are watching from the stones. The statements from search party members excluded from official records describe discoveries far more troubling than an empty camp. Jacob Turner, a local hunter who helped track the expedition, stated, "The camp was wrong, everything too perfect, laid out like furniture in a display. No one lives in a space that neat, especially not men in the wilderness for a week. It was like someone or something had arranged it all. A perfect imitation of a camp rather than a real one, and the air felt wrong, heavy, like just before a terrible storm, but worse." His official statement, taken by Sheriff Laycott on October 6, 1885, continues, "The circle of stones around the camp wasn't natural. Each stone the same size, same shape, placed exactly the same distance apart. Too perfect to be coincidence or casual arrangement. Inside the circle, no insect sounds, no birds, nothing living except the plants, and even they seemed wrong somehow, too symmetrical, too perfect. Outside the circle, normal forest sounds resumed. Sheriff made us remove the stones before we left. Said it was probably superstitious nonsense from the missing men, but he didn't sound convinced. The way his hand shook when he picked up those stones, never seen the sheriff afraid before." Michael Collins, another search party member, described finding a clearing approximately a quarter mile from the camp where the trees and undergrowth formed a perfect circle 30 feet in diameter, not cut or cleared by tools. Every plant simply stopped growing at that boundary. In the center, 5 sets of personal effects laid out with unnatural precision. Pocket watches, wedding rings, personal letters from family members, one collection for each missing man. Each item placed exactly 4 inches apart from the next. No human arranges things with such mathematical precision. His statement elaborates on details omitted from official records. The pocket watches all showed the same time, 3:27, despite being different makes and models that would wind down at different rates. All had stopped. The wedding rings, 3 of the men were married, were arranged in a perfect triangle. The personal letters were folded identically despite originally being different sizes and paper types. And most disturbing, when Sheriff Layton attempted to photograph the scene, his camera failed. Every plate exposed within that clearing came out completely black, despite functioning perfectly elsewhere. The third statement from Dr. Elliot Pearson, the physician accompanying the search party, perhaps explains why these testimonies were suppressed. His clinical observations note that upon returning from the expedition site, 3 of the 7 search party members developed identical and medically inexplicable symptoms: chronic insomnia, visual distortions particularly at twilight, and an inability to maintain orientation when attempting to face northeast, the direction of the valley. Within 6 months, 2 of these men had been committed to the Arkansas State Lunatic Asylum with diagnoses of acute melancholia with paranoid features. The third, Jacob Turner, reportedly hanged himself in December 1885, leaving a note that contained only the words, "They are still there, watching from the space between." Dr. Pearson's medical notes, dated October 10, 1885, offer clinical observations deliberately excluded from official records. Patient Turner exhibits symptoms inconsistent with any known pathology, periods of catatonia, alternating with extreme agitation, fixation on cardinal directions, persistent sensation of being observed despite privacy. Most concerning, pupils contract and dilate in regular pattern unrelated to light exposure. Precisely 17 seconds of contraction, followed by 28 seconds of dilation. Mathematical sequence continuing, regardless of environmental conditions. Pattern identical in both Collins and Wilson, suggesting external causative factor rather than individual physiological response. All 3 patients report identical visual hallucination, elongated figures visible only in peripheral vision, described as standing impossibly still and bending in ways bones shouldn't allow. Standard treatments ineffective, recommended isolation and observation. His final note on the case, dated December 7, 1885. Turner's suicide consistent with progressive deterioration observed in all 3 affected individuals. Collins and Wilson continue to deteriorate at identical rate despite separation and different treatment regimens. Both now demonstrate disturbing tendency to orient body position toward northeast regardless of room layout or restraints. Both independently reproducing same geometric symbol in any available medium, carved into walls, woven from bedding fibers, traced in spilled food. Symbol matches exactly the unusual arrangement of stones documented at expedition campsite. Cannot discount possibility of environmentally acquired condition with physical rather than psychological basis. Strongly recommend no further expeditions to region in question, pending scientific investigation of potential environmental toxins or geological anomalies. Sheriff Layton's letter to Governor Hughes refers to these developments and recommends not only concealing the true circumstances, but actively discouraging further exploration of the specific valley where the Blackwood expedition vanished. He writes, "Having interviewed those who returned from the search and observed the deterioration of their mental faculties firsthand, I am convinced that something in that location poses a grave threat to human sanity. I have taken the liberty of misfiling all accurate maps of the region and replacing them with versions that omit the valley entirely. I strongly urge that this area be designated permanently restricted under the pretense of watershed protection or similar plausible justification. His letter continues with disturbing personal observations. "I must confess, Governor, that I myself have experienced certain effects since returning from the search: difficulty sleeping, momentary disorientation, and a persistent sensation of being observed when facing the direction of the valley, despite substantial distance and intervening terrain. These effects diminish when I travel further from the region in question. More concerning, my compass behaves erratically when pointed northeast, a phenomenon I initially attributed to nearby metal objects, but which persists regardless of location or surrounding materials. I find myself drawn to return to the valley despite rational recognition of the danger, a compulsion I resist only through concentrated effort." Most tellingly, the letter concludes, "Whatever happened to Blackwood and his companions represents something beyond current scientific understanding, something for which the public is unprepared. I have secured all recovered journals and materials in a location known only to myself, separate from official records that might be accessed by curious parties. The official narrative of men lost to conventional wilderness hazards must be maintained, not merely to prevent panic, but to discourage others from investigating the region and potentially falling victim to the same fate. Some discoveries are best left unmade, some places best left unexplored. I implore you to use your executive authority to ensure this area remains undisturbed indefinitely." The governor apparently agreed. Historical records confirm that in early 1886, a substantial section of the Ozarks, including the valley in question, was declared a protected wilderness preserve close to public access by executive order. This designation remained in effect until the creation of the Ozark National Forest in the early 20th century, by which time the precise location of the Blackwood expedition's final camp had been obscured by decades of deliberately inaccurate cartography. The documents discovered in 1963 might have finally brought the truth to light, but circumstances intervened once again. The courthouse renovation was being supervised by Robert Layton, great-grandson of Sheriff Ambrose Layton, who recognized the significance of the discovery immediately. According to courthouse maintenance records, a minor electrical fire damaged the basement archives the very night the metal box was found. The box and its contents were presumed destroyed. They would have been had Robert Layton not removed them before staging the fire. His personal diary, discovered after his death in 1969, reveals he kept the documents hidden for 6 years while attempting to locate the valley using his ancestors' deliberately vague descriptions. Entries from 1963 through 1969 show a man increasingly obsessed with finding the location, his academic background as a geologist, providing the skills necessary to interpret the fragmented geographical information in the recovered documents. Early entries show scientific skepticism. Grandfather's materials discovered during renovation, remarkable historical find, though his conclusions regarding threats to sanity obviously products of 19th century superstition. Geological formations described by Hollister warrant scientific investigation. Potential for previously undocumented natural phenomenon. Will attempt to locate valley based on partial coordinates and terrain descriptions. March 17, 1963. Later entries reveal growing fixation. Third attempt at triangulation using restored portions of Blackwood's maps yields impossible results. Coordinates, place location, simultaneously in 3 different positions separated by several miles. Mathematical error seems unlikely given multiple verification methods. Strange dreams since beginning this work, geometric patterns that seem meaningful during sleep but impossible to recall upon waking. November 4, 1965. By 1967, his entries show deteriorating rationality. Compass behaves erratically when oriented northeast from Fayetteville. Needle fluctuation increases as I move toward suspected region, consistent with Hollister's notes. No conventional geological explanation for magnetic anomaly of this magnitude. Modern equipment should be less susceptible to such interference, yet effect stronger than described in 1885 accounts. Pattern expanding. Started marking anomalous compass readings on topographic map. Points form same geometric arrangement documented in expedition journals. Pattern suggests specific location approximately 22 miles east of Fayetteville. Will investigate personally when weather permits. His diary's final entry, dated June 12, 1969, reads simply, "I've found it. God help me, I've found it." The silence is exactly as they described. Stone formations expanded significantly since original documentation, now cover approximately 3 square miles, according to topographic survey. Perfect mathematical progression over 8 decades. Pattern now visibly resembles symbol in Blackwood's final journal page. Central formation, larger than others, appears hollow when viewed from certain angle. Interior space not visible from all perspectives, present then absent. Depending on observer position, cannot explain using conventional physics. Will investigate central formation tomorrow at dawn when light conditions optimal. If I don't return, all materials left with instructions for delivery to university archives. May they make better sense of this than I have. Robert Layton's automobile was discovered 3 days later at a remote Forestry Service Road trailhead approximately 22 miles east of Fayetteville. A search discovered his camping equipment 7 miles into the wilderness. His body was never found. The metal box containing the original Blackwood expedition documents was recovered from his home, eventually finding its way to the University of Arkansas archives, where it remained uncatalogued until 1997. The 5 men who vanished in September 1885 were never found. No remains, no additional equipment, no definitive clue to their fate has ever been discovered. But in the decades since, reports of unusual phenomena in that region of the Ozarks have persisted, primarily from isolated hunters or hikers who ventured deep into the less accessible areas of the mountains. Forest Service reports from the 1950s through the 1960s document multiple cases of experienced outdoorsmen becoming inexplicably disoriented in good weather conditions, some requiring rescue after being found wandering in circles despite possessing proper navigation equipment. Several described periods of absolute silence descending suddenly, followed by sounds that seemed to come from everywhere at once. One report from October 1954 describes a hunter found in a state of severe dehydration despite carrying full water containers. He claimed to have been unable to perceive the water he carried for 3 days, though no physical or psychological explanation for this selective perception deficit was ever established. In 1957, a geological survey team reported equipment malfunctions concentrated in a specific area approximately 20 miles east of Fayetteville. Compasses showing inconsistent readings, radio communications experiencing unusual interference patterns, batteries draining at accelerated rates. The team's report mentioned finding unusual stone formations, but contains no photographs or detailed descriptions. The survey was abruptly terminated when 2 team members developed acute disorientation and anxiety, requiring medical evacuation. The team leader's request for a follow-up investigation with specialized equipment was denied without explanation by regional authorities. In 1962, a graduate geology student researching limestone formations reported finding geometrically perfect stone columns arranged in triangular patterns that appeared to extend beyond typical visibility range, becoming visible or invisible depending on observation angle. His field notes describe magnetic anomalies consistent with those documented by Hollister nearly 8 decades earlier. His subsequent field reports became increasingly disjointed, eventually leading his faculty advisor to travel to the region to check on his well-being. Neither the student nor the professor returned from this trip. Their disappearance was attributed to flash flooding after heavy rains, though weather records indicate no significant precipitation during the period in question. Most recently, in 1965, 3 experienced backpackers reported setting up camp in a valley approximately 20 miles east of Fayetteville. According to their account, they awoke in the night to absolute silence, followed by sounds they could not identify. Their compass began spinning continuously, preventing them from determining direction. Seized by inexplicable panic, they abandoned their equipment and fled blindly through the darkness. Only 2 reached the nearest ranger station. The 3rd member of their party was never found, despite an extensive search. The 2 survivors described finding themselves surrounded by perfectly arranged stones that weren't there when we made camp. Both men experienced persistent nightmares and insomnia following the incident, with one eventually seeking psychiatric treatment for what he described as the constant sensation of being watched by something hiding just at the edge of vision. What happened to the Blackwood expedition? The rational explanation that 5 experienced outdoorsmen simply became lost and perished from exposure or accident collapses under scrutiny of the complete record. The placement of their personal effects in that perfect circle, the unnatural silence, the distortions in photographic plates, the mathematical impossibility of the rock formations, the precise shifting of plant specimens, all suggest something beyond conventional understanding. Preston's cryptic reference to the space between places echoes certain theoretical concepts that would not be formally proposed by physicists until decades later. Ideas about spatial anomalies, localized distortions in the fabric of reality. Could this remote Ozark Valley contain some kind of natural phenomenon that affects perception, alters physical laws, or perhaps even creates a permeable boundary with somewhere else? The fact that multiple independent witnesses over nearly a century have reported similar phenomena in the same approximate location lends credence to the existence of something genuinely anomalous, rather than mass delusion or coincidence. Whatever affected the Blackwood expedition appears to persist to this day, its influence waxing and waning according to patterns we do not understand. Perhaps most disturbing is the indication that exposure to this phenomenon leaves a lasting mark on those who encounter it. The search party members who developed identical, medically inexplicable symptoms. Robert Layton's obsessive quest that led to his own disappearance. The graduate student whose field reports deteriorated into incoherence before he vanished. The precise location of the valley remains difficult to determine from available records. Sheriff Layton's deliberate misfiling of maps combined with natural changes to the landscape over nearly a century and a half have obscured its exact position. This is perhaps fortunate. Some places are not meant to be found. Some boundaries are not meant to be crossed. In the years since the discovery of the complete Blackwood expedition records, several researchers have attempted to reconcile the reported phenomena with modern scientific understanding. Theories range from the presence of unusual electromagnetic fields affecting brain function and perception, to naturally occurring hallucinogenic compounds in the local ecosystem, to more esoteric proposals involving quantum mechanics and theoretical spatial anomalies. None fully explain the consistency of experiences across different time periods or the physical evidence described in the suppressed reports, particularly the precisely arranged personal effects and the mathematically perfect clearing where vegetation simply stopped. Whatever happened to Thomas Blackwood, James Hollister, William Preston, Edward Montgomery, and Samuel Green in those remote mountains in September 1885 remains one of America's most disturbing unsolved mysteries. Their expertise, their methodical approach, their careful preparation, all should have ensured their safe return. Instead, they vanished without trace, leaving behind only cryptic journal entries and perfectly preserved equipment that seemed more like a meticulous stage setting than an abandoned camp. Perhaps most chilling is Blackwood's final observation that the patterns in the stars appeared altered, as though the sky itself has shifted. Or perhaps it is we who have shifted. What does one make of 5 rational, educated men collectively experiencing such a fundamental distortion of reality? At what point does one consider the possibility that they encountered something that exists beyond our conventional understanding of the natural world. The Ozark Mountains keep their secrets. Vast stretches remain relatively unexplored even today. Locals still speak of certain valleys and hollows in hushed tones, places where hunters refuse to venture, where compasses behave erratically, where the natural sounds of the forest sometimes fall into unnatural silence. If you find yourself hiking in those remote regions and you come upon a clearing where the vegetation forms a perfect circle, or experience a sudden, absolute silence descending like a physical weight, remember the fate of the Blackwood expedition. Remember Preston's cryptic warning about the space between places. And perhaps most importantly, remember that some mysteries are best left unsolved. Some thresholds are best left uncrossed. For whatever waits in that silent valley has remained patient for over a century, waiting perhaps for someone else to venture into the space between.